Well, what I'm working on right now with a number of other people that are endeavoring similarly is what we started with is really inventorying all of those risk scenarios, catastrophic existential risks, and then looking at what the common generator functions that drive all of them are at a deep level, and then looking at what would a categorical solution to that generator function be, because whether I'm talking about the depletion of phosphorus or the depletion of nitrogen or the depletion of fish or the depletion of old growth forests or the depletion of topsoil, those are all depletion dynamics that are driven by certain things. Whether I'm talking about the excess of CO2 or the excess of nitrogen runoff in dead zones or the excess of mercury in the air or the excess, all those toxicity dynamics, those have something in common. Whether I'm talking about this type of war scenario or that type of war scenario or this type of terrorism scenario, they all have certain types of things in common. We can go to deeper levels of assessment as to what the generator functions are, and then say, if I try to solve one of these, but all the other ones are still on course, at most I maybe move the curve of like giving us a few more months. Maybe a couple more years, unless the one I'm doing wasn't actually the first one that hits, in which case it was kind of worthless. So given that the generator functions have so many different expressions, unless we solve them at that level, we don't really move, we don't really change the future possibility state that much. So we've been looking at being able to articulate the generator functions in ways that we can show are complete, meaning that solutions there are not only necessary for civilization making it, but also sufficient. And then actually developing architectures for viable solutions to those, which means how would an economic system, a governance system, a legal system, an infrastructural system, etc., work that didn't do those things, right? That generated fundamentally different types of behaviors. So we've been working basically on this level of understanding the nature of the problem well enough, and then being able to characterize design criteria of a solution, and then starting to develop actual instantiations of solutions that meet those design criteria. Next is starting to prototype them, starting to prototype governance methods that we've developed to see that they do what we think they will and refine them. And then, before we can build a city-state, since it has an economic system that isn't any economic system that's ever been, there's nobody trained in the things that they will need to be trained for how to administer it. Since it would have a governance system, etc., the politicians and lawyers and judges and bankers of this world would have nothing to do in that world. And the corresponding functions don't yet exist. The theory, the people aren't trained on them, so there's a whole new civics, right? There's a whole new set of stuff that people have to be trained on. There's a whole new process to technology design for how to do technology that doesn't cause toxicity issues. There's, an externality. So that means that we have to have a lot of people working on components of it and getting trained in those components, who will then be able to help build the city-state scale and populate it, to begin with. And that it's deep enough training that that'll have to happen in immersive environments, which means communities, villages, places where people are actually together, working on training in these new skills and capacities that will then be able to boot. And those will be not closed loop. They'll still require getting on a Boeing to fly somewhere and buying a computer from Apple, but they will be developing some of the capacities necessary to build a civilization where that won't occur. So we're working on kind of, as best as we can, the full articulation and description of the design criteria that are necessary, so that other people can play with those ideas also and see if those design criteria make sense to them, if they agree with our analysis, and then also work on those things independently, and then start to work on instantiating some of those ideas and then evolving the scale of them towards full-scale prototype, and then spread of that prototype. That prototype has to be not only right in kind, meaning that it has solved the generator functions, but it also has to be anti-fragile in the presence of the fact that the rest of the world is still rivalrous, and this is a new system. And it also has to be autopoietic, meaning it has to be able to expand and propagate itself